The canyon lay hushed beneath the newborn light of dawn, its cliffs steeped in molten gold, while the river below whispered over stones smoothed by centuries. Dust hung in the air like faded incense, rising from the hooves of wild mustangs that had gathered on the rim. And there, clinging to the brittle edge of rock, hung a woman whose breath came in gasps sharp enough to cut the morning quiet. Clara Whitfield's fingers bled against the sandstone, her nails clawing for purchase as pebbles tumbled into the chasm beneath. The ranger's badge on her chest caught the faint glimmer of sunlight, a cruel reminder of the oath she once carried proudly. Now it felt like a weight dragging her down. She had no rope, no partner, no one to lean on, only the long drop and the faint roar of water below. Once, she had been spoken of in saloons as fearless, the first woman to ride patrol alone in Sheriff Malloy's county. But courage wears thin when met with laughter and suspicion. She remembered the sidelong glances in town, mothers drawing their children away from her shadow. She remembered the sting of Malloy's words after the raid on the Brookstone Ranch, where smoke had risen and cattle were lost. You can't do a man's work without paying in lives. He had meant her life, her failure. Since then she had lived on the edges, where the prairie winds kept gossip at bay, but loneliness gnawed bone deep. A stone had struck her once, thrown by a boy no older than 10. His mother had pulled him back, whispering, "That's the fallen ranger." The shame of that moment lingered longer than bruises ever could. And now here she was, dangling between earth and sky, wondering if the gossip had been prophecy. Her arms trembled, her body slick with sweat despite the morning chill. Just as her grip faltered, a sound rose behind her, hooves drumming the soil. The mustangs. 3 of them. A stallion dark as smoke, mane tangled like storm clouds, pawed the edge, his hooves sending down small avalanches that stung her face. His mares, lighter of step, hovered near, their breath streaming in pale clouds. Clara dared a laugh, though it came out cracked. "Don't spook me, boys," she whispered to the air. But they did not scatter. They stood as though the land itself had called them. One mare, Juniper, lowered her head, muzzle brushing so close Clara could feel the warmth of breath on her cheek. For a heartbeat, she thought the animal might lift her, as if wild grace could bear her burden. Instead, the movement loosened a root she clung to, nearly breaking her last tether. Pain shot through her arms as she clamped tighter, teeth bared in desperation. The horses snorted, stamping, eyes flashing. To Clara, delirious with fear, it felt like they were guardians, or judges, silent and unblinking. Then another sound joined the canyon's hymn. Boots on stone, steady and unhurried. A man's voice, low and even, cut through the morning. Wild ones don't linger unless death's close. She forced her head upward. A broad-shouldered figure emerged, his hat brim shadowing eyes the color of river mud after rain. Elias Boone, a rancher, a widower, a man she had seen only from afar, always alone, always quiet. He carried rope coiled at his side, and when he saw her dangling, he did not curse or shout. He only set his jaw and began to lower the rope. "Take it," he said. Her pride rose even as her strength waned. "Better you leave me." He shook his head. His voice was as calm as the mustang's steady gaze. "Not today." Her body betrayed her will. She reached, trembling, caught the rope, and felt the burn of rough hemp sear her palms. Elias anchored himself against a rock, muscle straining, yet his face betrayed no effort, only patience. Slowly, with grunts and muffled gasps, she ascended inch by inch until her chest struck the dirt at the rim. She collapsed, choking on dust, her body trembling from head to toe. For a long moment neither spoke. The mustangs still lingered, tails swishing as if marking the end of some sacred rite. Clara pressed her forehead to the earth, ashamed of her weakness, ashamed of her need. Elias stood above her, shadow long in the rising sun, hat tipped low, breathing steady. When at last she lifted her eyes, she found his gaze not sharp with judgment, but softened with something like recognition. Respect, quiet and unspoken. The wind swept over them, carrying with it the scent of sage and the faint thunder of the mustangs departing. And in that hush, something unnameable stirred between two wounded souls. In years to come, The memory would remain etched in Clara's bones. The feel of rope against her palms, the warmth of dust against her cheek, and the silence of a man who chose not to let her fall. For in that canyon, shame had met mercy, and a simple rope became more than rope. It became the first fragile thread of a bond neither dared yet to name. The days that followed blurred like smoke across the prairie sky. Clara remained at Elias Boone's ranch, her arms bound in bandages where a rope burn had seared her skin. The house was plain, bare wooden walls, a lantern that threw soft amber light, a kettle that hissed on the stove, but every detail seemed gentler than she deserved. Elias said little, moving through his chores with quiet steadiness. He brought her water, tore cloth into strips, and set them against her palms. She tried to protest, but he only answered once, soft as falling ash. "You don't owe me pride. You owe yourself breath." In town, the story traveled swifter than wildfire. Children whispered of the ranger who dangled off a cliff, saved not by her own skill, but by a rancher and a band of mustangs. Gossip turned her survival into shame, tongues wagging in saloons and kitchens alike. Reckless, they called her. A burden. A woman who plays at being law. Sheriff Malloy voiced what others hinted. Boone should have left her. She'll drag him down too. Elias met those words with silence, though a muscle in his jaw tightened like a rope under strain. He never answered Malloy with speeches, only with presence, the weight of his gaze that made even the sheriff falter. Clara, unable to bear the whispers, returned to the canyon. The mustangs were there again, poised against the horizon like carved statues of wind and muscle. The stallion, Ashwind, did not flee when she approached. His eyes were flint, his mane tangled with burrs, but something in him steadied her. She stretched out a trembling hand and laid it against the warm curve of Juniper's neck. The mare shivered, but did not move away. Clara felt her own heart beat against that wild rhythm. For the first time in months, she did not feel like an intruder in this land. The horses, like her, were untamed, misunderstood, condemned by those who did not know their worth. She pressed her cheek briefly to Juniper's shoulder, and in that small gesture, she found a truth words could not carry. She still belonged somewhere. Back at the ranch, the bond between her and Elias grew without need of speech. They mended fences together, the sound of hammers echoing through the evening. They shared coffee from tin mugs beneath the lantern's glow. When she stumbled over uneven ground, his hand steadied her without comment. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, he brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek. His touch was feather-light, and yet the silence that followed carried more than any confession could. Something unnamed, unhurried, was taking root. But the prairie has a way of testing what it grants. Bandits returned, the same who had once torched Brookstone Ranch, riding hard across the plains with rifles and greed. Elias's cattle were their prize. The news reached Clara by dusk, when smoke curled on the horizon. The memory of her failure seared her chest, but this time she would not stand aside. She saddled Ashwind. The stallion resisted, rearing, wild eyes flashing, but Clara held firm, her voice low, her touch steady. At last, he allowed the bridle, as if recognizing something fierce and familiar in her. Elias joined her, rifle slung, his expression calm, though his eyes spoke of storms. They rode out together, mustangs at their side, hooves drumming like thunder. Dust rose behind them, swallowing the horizon in a storm of earth and light. The bandits fired into the air, jeering, but the mustangs split their ranks, scattering horses in panic. Clara bent low against Ashwind's mane, wind tearing tears from her eyes, and led the charge. Elias's shots cracked steady, each one a warning more than a kill. In the chaos, Clara found herself face to face with the bandit who had once sneered at her as she failed to defend Brookstone. He raised his gun, but before he could fire, Ashwind surged, hooves striking the ground with a fury that shook the man's courage. Clara leveled her rifle, steady at last, and the bandit fled into the dust. The others followed, broken by the wild storm of horses and resolve they could not match. Silence fell after, broken only by the labored breaths of men, horses, and wind. The herd circled them, Juniper and Sable standing guard, as if sealing the victory. Elias dismounted, eyes meeting Clara's with something like awe, not at the fight, but at the way she had risen from her fall. The town, hearing of the battle, fell into an unfamiliar quiet. Gossip gave way to grudging respect, then to pride. The ranger who had once been mocked was now spoken of as the one who rode with wild horses, who scattered bandits with thunder at her side. That night, Clara and Elias stood together by the corral, watching Ashwind lead his herd back into the dark. She did not speak, nor did he. Instead, her hand found his, rough palm against palm, and they stood that way until the stars bled across the sky. No vows were made, no promises spoken, only the shared breath of two lives no longer alone. And I tell you this, not as gossip, but as memory. For I saw how wild horses saved a woman from a cliff, and how she saved herself from shame. I saw how mercy wore the shape of a rope, and how love grew not in words, but in silence. If ever you find yourself clinging by a thread, remember this. Sometimes the hand that saves you is not a man's, nor a rope's, but the silent grace of wild things that refuse to let you fall.